Visit Sailrite.com for all your project supplies, tools, and instructions.
As you can see, this couch needs a lot of tender loving care. We're probably going to replace the foam and show you how to reupholster it. In fact, you can see the mice have been chewing at it.
In this tutorial video, we're going to reupholster the backrest of this jackknife sofa in an RV. Since we're also replacing the foam, the size will be a little bit different, so we're going to show you how to pattern for new foam. This video is part of our Airstream Argosy renovation. We'll be renovating an Airstream from top to bottom, inside and out. Join us for this exciting video series. We're going to show you all the steps to reupholster the backrest of a jackknife sofa in an RV. The first step is disassembly of the jackknife sofa.
Okay, we're starting to disassemble the sofa here, and there's a cushion back here at the back that we're going to take out. And then if you look back here, so back behind the sofa, there's some screws here, is basically just holding it in place. So if we release this screw, hopefully the back will just lift up.
Once the two nuts, two on the left and two on the right, are removed, the backrest easily comes apart. We'll also remove the seat portion as well, but we have a separate video showing how to reupholster that. Check it out at the link at the top right. To remove the seat, there are 3 nuts on each side. Remove those and the seat is easily removed.
There we go.
That'll pull forward.
She is loose. So these upholster boards just unscrew and we'll reupholster those. These are also the same way. If you go inside, you can see there's some screws that hold these in place.
The reupholstery of these panels will be done in a third video. Click the link at the top right to see that if you'd like to see how we did it.
Okay.
Okay, it's now time to remove the fabric from the backrest of our jackknife sofa.
We've got our couch taken apart and we're ready to disassemble it. So we've taken it here to the workshop. This is the backrest of our couch. It's not a bad idea to take a few photos of how the assembly was put together. That way when you take it apart, if you have any questions about it, you can refer to your photos. These are hog rings, and what we're going to do is take some wire cutters and just cut the hog rings. This one's already been broken. But we're going to do this on the back side to release this from our frame assembly. So I believe I have all the hog rings released, and now we're just going to take the cover off. I think they have some hog rings in the middle here that were used for a fabric pole that you can see here. The fabric is tucked down in between 2 pieces of foam, so we'll probably have to release those too. But for now, I'm just going to take it off and see what it looks like before I start releasing those as well. Wow, this foam is a hodgepodge of foam. So we have the fabric off the backside, and you can see there are definitely fabric poles in here. This fabric is tucked in the middle here. It's also tucked here. So we need to release some of these on the backside as well. Looks like this is one of the hog rings on the back side. So these hog rings are definitely holding the fabric pole. So I'm just going to release all of these. So now let's see if we can pull this out. That gives it the release that I need. So our fabric is separated. Now let's take a look at the foam. This is definitely a very firm foam here, and this piece that comes along the backside was more than likely not at that location when it was manufactured, but more than likely it just fell down over time. It was up here, probably like this, so that the metal frame would not be felt by hand. In any case, can we reuse the foam? Yes, you could reuse the foam. However, if I look at the foam from this side, I mean, if I feel it, it does have a pretty pretty good body, but there's definitely some spots that are going in. So I think I'm going to replace it. And what they've done is they used a kind of like eggshell foam here, so that it's nice and soft. And then they put a firmer foam here. Now this is a backrest, and so what I recommend is that we put a medium firm foam here, and then a soft foam on top. Like we'll probably use a 1-inch soft foam here, and then a medium foam here. On the sides, we may use something a little bit firmer. We may even just reuse this, because this looks like it's in pretty good shape for the most part. So we're going to replace the foam. So I've taken the foam off. This is the top, and the screws or the bolts, I'm sorry, are down here. So this is the top, and I think I'll label it on the side where I can definitely see it. So top. So that way I know how to orientate the frame.
Next, we'll take some measurements of the old foam and cut the new foam.
See how they have the shape cut in this? The problem with leaving it like this is that when you take the fabric over the edge, there's nothing to support the fabric. So I'm not going to make a piece like this. I'm not going to duplicate that. I think that's going to result in something that's not as nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have the foam cut flush here, following this nice shape. Then we want to go across the foam here and measure. And the foam may have compressed a little bit. Now notice I'm not measuring this 1-inch pad that gives a little bit more softness to the foam. I'm just measuring the block underneath. And that block measures 16.25 inches. I'm going to make it 16.5 because it may have compressed slightly. And going a little bit oversized isn't going to be a big deal because I'm going to pattern everything over again. We're going to be making this into 2 sections. There'll be a fabric cover here and a fabric cover here. There's a slit in the middle here, and they've just glued a fabric on the back side to hold that together. So basically it's going to be 2 cushion covers. So I'm going to measure from the center here, which is right there, to the end of the foam here, and I get 37.5 inches. And you always want to confirm that the other side is the same measurement. Yep, 37.5 inches. And the same height. Yep, it's the same height. Now we also have to do thickness. So we didn't do that on the other side, but obviously it's the same. So this is to the face there. So this is a 4-inch foam, as you can see. So we're going to do this block in a 4-inch foam. If I flip this around, you can see here there's a slit in the middle for the fabric pull, but yet it stops being slit here. So this foam, we're going to cut a slit in it just like this, except we're going to have it stop short. Same thing over here. The slit stops short. In fact, their slit goes kind of at an angle here, like that. We're going to make ours straight. Same one with this one. So that's a fabric pull, and then obviously the center here is a separate piece of foam. We marked 37.5 here, and we have 16.5 here. And then I just drew a line in the middle here to indicate that we're going to slit it here and not slit it over here. And I always like to use a T-square like this, or some sort of square to draw my lines with this foam. This is a 4-inch piece of foam. It's a high density foam. And the reason that I'm using a high density foam is it doesn't compress over time. It'll last for years. There are 2 ways to cut this foam. We can use the Sailrite blade foam saw, which has a base so that you can cut almost perfectly vertically. And then you have an electric kitchen knife, which actually works pretty well. We're going to demonstrate both. We're going to start with the blade. See how nice this one cuts? Now this foam is a little bit yellowed on the side, mainly because it's in our scrap pile, because it had a large cut in it. We can't sell that to you, so I get to use all the scrap foam. If your foam is yellow like this, compared to when it's brand new, it's not going to hurt the integrity or its life, so don't worry about it. The sun just has a tendency to yellow the foam. So I'm going to separate these tables here, mainly so that I can put this piece of foam on the edge of the table where I'm going to cut. And I can use the table as a guide for this electric kitchen knife, because you have to hold this pretty straight. So you have to hold this one vertically to the best of your ability. And I like to use a sacrificial table like this. And you can also put some weights on this, which is not a bad idea, or have somebody hold it down, because sometimes it has a tendency to want to move. And watch, this will cut it pretty easily too. And that's not a bad cut. But I'm going to use the Sailrite blade foam saw just because it's definitely more accurate. So this is a super soft 1-inch foam here, and we're going to have it wrap around here and leave some excess over the top, a couple inches. So I've decided to make it about 7 inches. So I'm going to mark it over here at 7 inches and then cut it to size. I'm going to strike a line here so that I know where that foam goes. Now we also have to cut a wedge, and I'm going to do it off of this side that's a little bit yellow, not that it matters. And to do that, I'm going to mark it 3/4 of an inch in from the edge so that I have a reference line to follow, because this is going to be the top edge of the cushion, and I want it to be a little bit more rounded. So 3/4 inch in there, and then 3/4 inch on this side, which is right there. So I can take the blade foam saw and I can actually hold the base here, just keep your fingers away from the blades, and I can use those marks to guide it. So the angle cut is down. I have this as the top. So the wedge goes down towards this foam. I've also marked it T here for top. And we have a line struck on this side as well. We're going to glue this 1-inch soft foam to this block of foam using 3M Juno trim adhesive. I love using this stuff for upholstery applications like this. We want to coat both surfaces. So we're going to have the glue on the edge, because we're going to stick this to the edge. So I'm going to put it on both surfaces like that, and I'm going to let the glue tack up a little bit. Now, when I touch the glue, it's tacky, so it's ready to be bonded together. So I'm going to roll this up and just apply pressure. Then I'm going to take it and lay it like this so that I can put glue here and on this surface. Glue's tacky again on both surfaces. Put her down. Then we're going to put some spray glue here and on here. Tacky again, bond it. There we go. We have a little bit of glue that we're going to cut through, and I love to use McLube on the blade, at least this part of it, because it makes it just glide nicely through the foam. I even put a little bit on the base. The base of the Sailrite blade foam saw can actually be removed so that we can cut in the middle of this foam. So I'm going to hold this as straight as possible and cut through. Once I'm through, I'm going to use that table edge that I lined it up against. I'm going to stop there, then I'm going to go the other direction.
Now that our foam's cut to the size, we can determine the size of our decorative fabric.
We're going to put the frame on top of our assembly, and remember, we marked the frame top, so we know this is the top, and here where the bolts are, so we know for sure that's the area it needs to go. This is where the fabric pole goes, so we want to put that on top, and then We want this to be in the center of the two pieces of foam, which it is. There we go. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to take some measurements to know how to cut our fabric to size. So I'm going to take a flexible tape measure and I'm going to run it underneath the cushion. So if we measure all the way around, we get 47 inches, and that's plenty of fabric to tie into these springs with our upholstery hog rings. We're going to steal 1 inch for the hog ring with the piping on this side and on this side, but we're also going to have a 3-inch pleat, and that will steal some of this fabric as well. So that's why I like to cut this so that the tape measure basically comes all the way around and touches itself again. So my top plate is going to be 47 inches to wrap around this assembly and be attached to this frame. Even though it's too long, what you can do is you can roll the fabric and then you can use the hog rings through the fabric.
Here's a look ahead. Notice that I'm rolling the fabric on that cording so that I can attach the fabric to a specific location on the spring.
Now the length for the top plate, I want it to end right where the foam is. I know this is sticking out, but it'll compress nicely. So I'm going to measure from here, this edge of the foam, all the way to the center. And what I get is 37.5. That's where the foam is cut. The ends will have its own separate boxing piece. So what I want to do here is I want to measure from the top down here at the tabletop, and I want to determine about how much fabric I'm going to need to come down here and attach here. So it looks like 12 inches will work. I'm going to steal 1 inch for my fabric pole. So I think I'll make this 13 inches high, which should give me enough fabric to come around all this hardware and attach it here. I'm going to separate this second half here so I can get a measurement here of how high I want this end piece, because this is going to have an end piece just like the other side. So I'm going to come down to the tabletop down here, and I'm going to basically, I'm not going to wrap around this post. So here I really only need about 8 inches because I can attach it easily. I'm going to go 9 inches just to be safe, wrapped around here, and that'll be the height here. We also want to take a look at this slit, and we know that it's exactly in the center of our foam, and we know that it is about 4 inches from each end. We need a pattern for this end. This end's a little bit more even in its cut because all of them are pretty much the same. We're going to place it on top of Durascrim pattern material like this, and all I'm going to do is take a marker and I'm going to mark roughly this size, or this shape I should say, around the perimeter of the foam. Okay, and then we need one of them to be up 9 inches, and the other one, like we talked about, 13 inches. So I'm just going to extend this line up. It basically is 90 degrees up from here, so from the bottom edge, so that I can cut it squarely on both sides. We're going to cut this out. We're going to cut a little bit on the inside of the line. This is the exact same size as the foam for the most part.
You may be asking about seam allowance. Well, we don't add any because we want that cushion to be nice and tight. Now we'll cut the fabric to size.
This is the running length and this is the width. And do I see a difference in the pattern? I think I do see a slight one, but it's not a big deal for this fabric. So I don't really care how I orientate the fabric panels when I sew them together. Okay, we are using a T-square to mark out our rectangle, and this rectangle is 37.5 by 47. And this is the back side of our fabric, and we used a grease pencil. We're going to cut it out with scissors. You could use a hot knife if you want the edges to not unravel a little bit, but the edges are all going to be on the underside, so it really won't matter much. Now for this, I'm just holding the pattern in place and cutting around it. I need to go have one that's 13 inches high, which I'll measure here in a minute, and one that's 8 inches high. And we also need to flip this. And you may ask, well, why do we need to flip it or mirror it? Well, we need to flip it because of the fact that one corner is more rounded than the other. Here, and I'll show you that in a second here. So this is one of them cut. So, and you notice our writing is up. So for the second one, we need to turn it this way, upside down, so we can mirror it. And if you look at our pattern here, this is not as rounded as this, because remember, we rounded the foam more here than we did over here. So now for this one, I need to measure up 13 inches. So I'm just going to mark at 13 inches here in a couple spots, and we will strike a line at that location. And then we'll continue to cut up towards that line and then across. And then the second one, we're going to do it so it's flipped upside down, and we're going to do that one 8 inches. We're not going to show that. I have the 8-inch high piece and the 13-inch high piece. Now I have 2 of these cushions that I have for this backrest. So because the corners are rounded, we need to make mirrors of them so we can use the right one for the right cushion. So I'm going to take the 8-inch. I did pattern it like this. I'm going to pattern it with this, the right side facing up here, using the one I cut out, and then the same thing with this 13-inch one. So this is the wrong side, the right side is facing up, which means the second copy will be mirrored of the first copy. So this is the 37 inches and a half, 37 and a half inches this way, which means the pleat's going to go in the center of this. We know the pleat's in the center. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to fold it in half along the 47-inch length. And we're going to make sure the corners match up. So I'm going to turn this around and match up the corners. And hopefully we've got a pretty nice rectangle that should be pretty square. Yeah, it looks like it is. And what I want to do is I want to mark where that corner falls. And the best way to do that is to actually take your scissors and cut a triangular wedge that's very small, that does not go a ½ inch into the seam allowance portion. So I'm going to just cut it right like this. And when I splay it open, you can see that's our center. So here is our center location. What I'm going to do on the back side is I'm going to put a straight edge on it and strike a line. This is going to be where our pleat is and also our fabric pole. So I want to attach my fabric pole on first. It doesn't have to be done that way, but the pleats will make it a little bit more difficult after they're installed. So I like to mark the center well and make sure that it's right in the center, because it's got to line up with the pleats. And then we're going to create a fabric pole for this.
In this chapter, we're going to be creating a fabric pole. Here's a look ahead at our fabric pole sewn onto our decorative fabric. Before we make that fabric pole, we need to discuss how to cut it to the correct size, the length and the height. If you have a project with pleats on each side of the fabric pole, as we do here, we like to keep the fabric pole about 7 inches away from the end of the pleated fabric's edge. That means the length of our fabric pole will be about 23.5 or 24 inches in length. Earlier, we made a slit in the center of the foam to allow the fabric pole to be pulled through it. To determine the finished height of the fabric pole, we need to know the thickness of the foam. Ours was 4 inches and 1 inch, equaling 5 inches overall. We will then need to subtract for our seam allowance and for the pleat. Eventually, a pleat will be created in our decorative fabric. This is along the line of the fabric pole, and it will use up 3 inches of fabric. You may be asking, how did I determine a 3-inch pleat? Well, later on we'll have a chapter called Creating Pleats. Here's a sneak peek of that chapter and how we determined a 3-inch pleat.
So I'm going to create a 3-inch pleat, which means I'm going to mark over from the center position 1.5 inches and mark my fabric. and then obviously 1.5 inches on this side, which is 3 inches, and mark my fabric.
So from the center position, we've marked over 1.5 inches on one side and 1.5 inches on the other, and that equals 3 inches. Then we fold the fabric to that center position, pin it in place on one side and also the other side. That is our 3-inch pleat. When the pleat is created on both ends of the fabric, it will leave excess fabric in the center. It is approximately half the amount of the pleat, which is 3 inches. So we'll divide the 3 inches by half, leaving 1.5 inches. Here's the equation for the desired finished height, but we need to know the desired cut size, and here's the equation for that.
So we want the finished size to be 3 inches. We're going to take 1/2 inch for sewing, and we're going to take 1 inch for our cording, our piping. So I'm making it 4.5 inches. And my width is 24, as we discussed. 4.5 is here. This should give us a good fabric pull that when we're done is 3 inches after stealing 1/2 inch for sewing it on and 1 inch for our piping. I'm going to strike a line here that's 1 inch from the edge. This is where my piping is going to be sewn in. I'm not actually using a foam piping, I'm actually using a sling chair cording. It's just more strength for our hog rings, our upholstery hog rings. And you can notice that I'm folding it right to the line that we struck. So I'm going to line it up to that line, and I'm going to feed it through my cording foot. And I'll do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning. So I'm right on that line, as you can see. Nobody's going to see this. This is an inside application, but we want it to be accurate as far as being on that line.
Now that our fabric pull is done, it's time to sew it onto the decorative fabric.
I'm going to find the center of this and put a notch in it. And then what I want to do here is find the center of this so we can center it. And I'm going to fold it back so that we can have it on the outside. So right about there is the center. So I'm just going to put a mark here. Then I'm going to open this up. I'm going to place a line 1/2 inch from our middle line so that I can match up the fabric pull edge to that. And then I'm going to put double-sided tape on it so I can actually stick the fabric pull at that location so it doesn't move on me. Peel off the transfer paper, and I'm going to line up the fabric pull at the center spot along that line and stick it down. And what I'm going to do is sew a 1/2 inch from the edge of the fabric pull, so my stitch will be right on the center line because I'm going to sew it right there. So a 1/2 inch would be right about there because I can see my original mark, so that's where my needle's going to penetrate. So I'm going to just use the presser foot as my guide here, and I'll do a little bit of reversing here. I'm using my cording foot in this. That'll work for jobs like this. If I were doing a lot of sewing, I'd probably change this to the standard foot, but I still need this cording foot for other parts of this job. Because everything is basted, I don't have to worry about things moving on me. I just have to sew it so there's no wrinkles in there.
In retrospect, I should have replaced the foot with a standard foot because the cording foot just doesn't work as well without cording. I won't need the cording foot again until I'm at the end of my final stages.
You can stop. Okay, our fabric pull is sewn in. It doesn't matter which side this 1 inch flap is on, but as you can see, it's pulling right on that center line that we struck, so that's perfect. So now we need to create our pleats on both sides here. but we need this to be turned so the right side is up.
In this chapter, we're going to show you how to create the pleats.
So here's our center mark, and we're working from the correct side of the fabric, or the right side is facing up. So I'm going to create a 3-inch pleat, which means I'm going to mark over from the center position 1.5 inches and mark my fabric. And then obviously 1.5 inches on this side, which is 3 inches, and mark my fabric. So I'm going to confirm that that's exactly 1.5, and that's 1.5 right there. Yep. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fold this with my fingers right on that mark that we made, like that, and I'm going to fold it to the center line, and then I'm going to pin it in place. So I'm going to do this and come through, and then just to keep it in place, I'm going to pin it back here, even though this is probably not necessary, but I like to make sure the fabric is nicely folded. So I'm going to put a pin in there. That one's done. So now we do the same thing here. We fold it on that mark, and then we carry that mark over to that center point, like that, and then we pin it in place as well. So if you look at this pleat here, there's what it looks like on the bottom side, and if you measure this fabric, we're using up 3 inches of fabric in this pleat. That's how we determined the length of our fabric pole. Now we need to do the exact same thing on the opposite side. So after you have the 2 pleats in, this is what it should look like on the outside surface of your fabric. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take this over the sewing machine, and we're going to sew a 1/2 inch from this edge just to tack this pleat in place on both sides. Now again, I'm just using the cording foot again because I still have more cording to sew. And then I'm going to sew carefully over the pins, making sure that everything's nice and flat. And this just secures our pleat in place. Okay, and we'll do the same thing on the other side. We can remove our pins, and I want to show you what it looks like on the bottom side. We've got both ends done. That's what it should look like on the bottom side. And you should see the center line that you've struck is in the center of the pleat, which it is.
Now we're going to sew the boxing ends to the top plate.
I've placed my foam on top of this, and there's the top side. It has the curve in it. Well, this one doesn't have much of a curve in it. And this is my end piece, my larger one. So it's going to go over here, and this has more curve than this does over here. So what I want to do is I want to mark, because this piece, the bottom plate didn't have a top yet and a bottom. So this is now going to be my top. So I'm going to put a T up there. And this is my top. I'm going to put a T over here because this corner is more rounded than this corner. So that's the way that it's going to be assembled. So this is the shorter of the pieces, 8 inches tall for the middle, and you can see that this is more rounded, which means this is my top. So I'm going to mark it T. For our second side, because we're going to have to repeat this, this is more rounded over here, and this one's more rounded over here. So we're just marking this in advance here. We can put these aside. You need outside surfaces to face each other, and this is the center position, so we're going to start sewing this on. And this other side has to be sewn on in the same manner, so the T, this is very important, the T has to be on the same side of this side boxing piece on the opposite side. So we'll center that there. And what I'll do to make sure that I don't forget that is I'll actually pin this one in place, and we'll start sewing the other one, but at least we know that one is supposed to go like this, so the T's are the same. So here's the center where the pleat is, and I'm going to start about an inch or two above the pleat. I'm going to match the fabric up to a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to put a magnetic guide there so that I make sure that I'm sewing a 1/2 inch from that edge. So I'm matching up the center with that pleat right there. And we'll start sewing here. Now I'm not going to do any reversing here because we're going to be sewing over these stitches when we turn it around and sew the other half. So I'm just going to start here. So we're just going to line up edges as we sew here. Coming to the curve here, so I'm going to pull this so that we're sewing a 1/2 inch from that edge. So notice how I'm pulling the side boxing over as we come up to the needle. Now I'm going to sew almost all the way up here. I'm probably going to have to split some of the fabric at another point. I mean, when I fix it around the frame. So that's not a big deal. We can cut the fabric or cut the stitch. I actually like to cut the fabric rather than the stitch, but I'm going to stop about an inch from the top and do some reversing. Okay, so that side is done. Now what we'll do is we will flip this over and sew it from the center out with the boxing on the bottom side and the plate on top. So I'm going to cut some of these off and we'll start. Okay, put it under there. I want to try to sew right on the previous stitches. So I'm going to make sure my needle's right on top of that, which it is, and then we're going to sew this direction. Right now I'm just sewing over my previous stitches. And now I got to make sure everything's lined up as I sew. And it's a little bit more difficult with the boxing on the bottom side, but it's not bad. So now we're getting to that curve here. So I'm just going to sew slowly around that curve. I'm going to pull this around as I sew. And I'm pretty much around that curve. So I'm almost to the straightaway. And again, I'm going to stop about an inch or so from this edge and do some reversing here. Now we're going to do the exact same thing to the opposite end. We're not going to show that.
Where the fabric pole goes, it'll separate the fabric and leave a gap. We're going to show how to reduce it.
Okay, I've got my fabric laid out nice and flat here, and I'm going to fold this so that it's nice and flat so I feel no wrinkles in there. And it's along our fabric pole. And you can see this is the folded side. What I want to do is I want to sew a stitch 3/4 of an inch down here. Why is that? Well, let's pretend this is our center opening between the two cushions. In other words, our fabric pole is going to come between here. Here's our fabric pole where my fingernails are. If I just have it so it pulls, then the fabric is going to be spread apart like that. If I sew about 3/4 of an inch, it'll tighten it up so it looks like this. And that's what we want. I don't want it wide open like this. I want it fairly tight. So that's why we're going to sew a stitch 3/4 of an inch here. Now we're not going to go beyond the fabric pole because there's that 3-inch pleat here. If we go too close to the pleat, then it'll mess up the way the pleat looks. But I want to make sure it's splayed out flat like it is. I'm going to use the clear acrylic ruler, place it on that splayed out flat 3/4 of an inch down, and I want to strike a line here that I can follow with the sewing machine. So I want to make sure that it's accurate, because I don't want this to be crooked. That'll possibly show up in the end results. So now I've got it to the machine and everything's nice and flat. I can feel that it is. And I'm going to put it under that foot and I'm going to sew right on that line starting at the fabric pole, going no further. So I'm going to do some reversing here because this will be under a little bit of stress. There we go. And then as we sew, I'm going to pull both left and right a little bit so that it's flat. And on that first stitch that we created on the fabric pole, was stuck on my knee. So I'm spreading the fabric as I sew, as I mentioned. Then when I get to this fabric pole, and I'm going to do some reversing there. And that's all I need to do.
The fabric's going to be attached to a metal frame via hog rings. We need to reinforce it with cording.
This is the outside of our fabric, and along the edges of the plate and the boxing, we're going to strike a line 1 inch in. This is going to be for our piping. It doesn't have to be completely accurate like this. I don't have to do this, but I like to do it for consistency. So I'm going to do this on all 4 of the pieces. The 2 ends of the boxing as well. So these are the boxing pieces here. I'm going to try to straighten it out here. And this will just give us a reference when it comes time to sew the piping, which is coming up next. So here's my spline. There's my mark. I'm just going to line it up to that mark, and we will sew this on all the sides. And the first one, I'm going to do some reversing at the beginning and the end. So basically it's 4 separate sections. So we just line it up like that. I've got my cording foot on. Again, this doesn't have to be extremely accurate, but I like it to be. So we'll do this with all 4 sides. We're not going to show all of this.
Now we have the task of attaching the fabric to the metal frame.
There's our T. So this is the top side. So I'm going to lay this out now that we have it with the piping or cording all the way around, as you can see on all 4 sides. Have our fabric pole in place. We're ready to fit it around the foam. So there's my T here. So I'm going to place this in here and start pulling the fabric around the cushion here. Around the foam, I should say. So I got my second piece of foam here. Now we haven't done a cover yet for this one, but we have to do the same process for this. But we might as well do one before we do the other to make sure that we're happy with it. So I've got it pulled up nicely there. Here's the middle position, and that looks like it's pulled up nice. So I'm going to grab this fabric pole that is deep within this cavity and kind of just raise it up a little bit, because I don't want to have to be doing this with the frame in the way. This will make it easier for me to grab when I put the frame on top. So there it is. And then I'm going to cut some cotton or top knots or anything to help protect the foam from the springs. So I've already pre-cut this to size, and I just want to cut a slit in the middle to allow my fabric pole to come up. So I'm going to kind of notch it like that. That way I know approximately where it is. This does not have to be accurate. All we're trying to do here is protect the foam. So cut a slit and then just go down the middle of that. I put the second piece over here to help support the frame because it's pretty heavy. And this is the top. It's already marked top. And we want it, this middle section, to be right along the edge of the foam. So the edge of the foam is, so here's the foam. We want this to be centered over the foam. So the foam's right in the middle of that, splits that. And then we want this middle section here to be over top of our slit, so it goes up a little bit. This is the top, and our frame, this foam's going to come down and rest on that frame, but I don't want anybody to feel that frame, so I've cut another strip of the soft foam, and I'm just going to have it come around this corner to kind of protect that corner and stuff it in here. That way, yeah, you can hardly feel the frame now with that padding up there. So that's just extra padding. These are hog rings for upholstery. If you look at the tips, they're very sharp. And this is a hog ring plier, which is spring loaded. So all you got to do is put this in here like that, and you're ready for installation. I'm going to take my hog ring pliers and I'm going to go around that and just give it a crimp. And that hog ring is installed, and it pulls that fabric pole up. And right now I'm going to basically just get the fabric pole in the general position that I want. So I'm going to put probably 3 to 5 in here. So here we're at the end of the fabric pole, and even at the end, because this bites into the fabric, it actually will not come off of the end. So it comes around and it actually crimps right into the fabric, and you can be assured that that's not going to come out. We're going to put one in at the opposite end, and then we'll show you what we're going to do next. So right here at the top, we don't want this bar to show up. We're going to have the fabric coming around here and wrapping around. This may go underneath, but this bar may show up. And so to prevent that, what I've done is I've taken some scrap, and you can see that I've sewn the cording into both ends. And I'm actually just going to wrap this around the bar in the spot where it might be visible, and I say might because I'm not sure, but I'd rather have this protected now rather than finding out later on that it looks ugly. So again, I'm going to use my hog ring pliers and attach this around the bar. I forgot that it didn't matter. There, I'll make a slit here because there's a spring in the way, so I just cut through my piece and I'll clamp it over here too, just to make sure. So we're going to concentrate first on this top. This is where it's going to be most visible, where the other cushion butts up to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lift this frame up because we don't really have it secured anywhere, and I'm going to pull this side boxing in like this and then attach it to the inside here with a hog ring. Now don't worry, if you don't get this in the right spot, you can always come back and cut them and reinstall it. So we have a hog ring there, and I did go through this cotton fabric on the bottom side, no big deal. The hog ring is going to hold that in place. I'm going to take this and I'm going to come up kind of underneath this spring system and make sure that it looks pretty good. And I'll probably start at this corner rather than the middle to make sure that it's tucked in. We want to cut off any excess piping that might be felt. Of course, this is the bottom side, so probably nothing will be felt. We're going to tuck this in, and then I'm going to use a hog ring here as well. Tuck this in and attach it just about there, and we can break this if we need to. We're going to inspect it, and then we'll make adjustments if we need to. So let's see what that looks like. Now in the middle, there is a pleat, and if you look at it, I'm just going to show it to you real quick. See how it's pulled in? So we need to pull this seam around, so we need a lot of pressure at the middle position. That's normal. So what we want to do is we want to pull this deeper than we did the sides, and if we need to, we can actually kind of manipulate the fabric up there. So I'm going to attach it way up here with the hog ring, and then we'll see what it looks like, and we can make adjustments if we need to. So right up here with quite a bit of force. There we go. Let's see what that looks like. It's better. It's not perfect yet. So we're going to work the fabric this direction and probably even pull a little bit tighter. These are wire cutters. I'm just going to cut this one because I think I need to pull this one up a little bit higher. That's the beauty of this. You can just experiment until you get it looking exactly the way you want it. So we're going to pull that one out and pull it up a little bit higher. So we're going to have to come underneath so I don't have to make slits. And sometimes you should grab some needle nose or some pliers and kind of pull your fabric. Don't worry about this white fabric. It's only there to protect the foam. And I think I'll connect it right about here. And we'll see what that looks like. Yeah, it's starting to get better. Still got a little bit of adjustment here, but we'll do that up here. Okay, to do this top portion up here, it's going to come around here like this. So I'm going to tuck that foam in or either cut some of it out. I think I can just tuck it in. Yeah, and there's a piece of piping. I don't necessarily want that to be felt, and it's not doing anything, so I'm going to cut that off. And then what I want to do here is I want to create a fold in this edge so that we can kind of, in a way, create what looks like a finished edge, like this. So we're going to fold it in, and then we're going to pull it down and see how that gives a nice finished look. Now, as I talked about before, if this is too long, all you have to do is roll it. It's not too long, but you can roll it to get a specific spot, and then you can use your hog ring clips at that spot. But I'm not going to do that because I have plenty of locations to clip it in the middle. So again, fold it back, pull this in, make sure everything's tucked nicely in there, and we will give it a little hog ring attachment right here. And we're kind of holding that hem in place too by doing that. It's rolled and the hog ring is actually holding it. So there we go. We're going to do the same thing over here. We're going to create a fold, kind of creating a fold at that cording as well. We're going to pull it fairly taut until we're happy. Around here, and I think we're going to attach it right here. I think that'll be good. I'm going to roll it actually a little bit. That kind of keeps that hem in the right spot, and then I can attach it down here. So I'm just going to come through all this and get that. There we go. We're going to connect a few spots here too to just give it nice and to make it nice and tight along the whole length. So one here and one down here. And you can actually go around piping strips that have already been secured as well. So don't, if you feel like you can't reach one of those metal springs, just attach to another piping strip. So now that this side is down, I'm going to work at the top here. And I don't want to pull a ton, because if I pull a ton, I'll get a hard spot here, and then I'll get a hard spot here. So what I want to do is I just want to make sure the fabric is fairly taut, kind of like that, and then attach it. And again, if we're not happy, we can make changes. So there, and then I'll come over here, and I'm going to do the same thing, even though this is the bottom side. Now remember, we said that if we don't hit a spring and your pull, this is too long, you can just roll it. So we could do that. If we want to get more tension, I can just roll a little bit and then attach a hog ring. So there's the center. We still have to attach this, but we're just getting the general position down. I'm going to come over here before we go any further and work on this end just like we did over there. So make sure that your seam is on the edge of the cushion the best as possible. And then we have these bolts here. Don't worry about that. Right now we're just going to come up over them, and we're not even going to slit the fabric yet. We're just trying to work on the seam area to get the center attached. So right about there, and I'm going to put a hog ring right here. Okay, we're not going to cut a hole there until we're happy with what we're doing. And then I'm going to pull up this side. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Of course, I forgot to load a hog ring. Got to do that. There we go. And this is kind of getting in our way, so I'm going to move it out of the way for now. Just working on this end. And attach this right there. Good. Now we can always cut slits in this, but right now we're working around those bolts. That's why you see that bump. Now we'll make sure this seam looks good. Put my fingers in there if I need to make fine-tune adjustments. You won't get a perfectly straight line because of that pleat, but we're trying to get it as best looking as possible along that line. I can see it better than probably you can. I'm going to lift this up, and I need to load a hog ring again. And I'm going to roll this one just a little bit to get a little bit more tension on this one spring and attach it. Now we're going to go ahead and attach some more hog rings on the fabric pole. We only attached 3. Now I'm going to attach them about every 4 inches, maybe 3 inches apart, so we get a good pull everywhere. So you want to inspect it and look at it. Now you notice that the edge comes in here. That's because every time you sew something it shrinks up a little bit. And we did our best to try to make that look good, but you can expect things like that to happen. And I believe that looks pretty good. So we still have not fastened it down all the way yet. You can see these corners are loose and these edges are loose. Okay, so we're going to create this corner here. We're going to cut off this excess here. There's no reason to worry about this. We can trim this away after we get it fastened. We just want this edge to look good from here on out. And so I'll just tuck the fabric in until I get a pleasing corner. That looks pretty good to me. Okay, so then we'll just attach this at this juncture. And I forgot to load a hog ring. Yet again, I should always load a hog ring after you're done at applying a hog ring, then you never have that problem. So yeah, right there. We're going to attach to this spring. And then we're not going to put much tension on this. Because if I put a lot of tension, you see that hard spot? I actually just want it to be taut, but not super taut. So again, load a hog ring, and then work on the top is the most important. The bottom is not. So right about there. And if I attach to there, will it pull too tight? I don't think so. So right there, I'm going to attach, and we'll just keep doing this on these 2 edges until we're done. Okay, after we were done attaching this one's not in the right spot, so I'm going to use wire cutters. That's how easy it is. These things are rather inexpensive. Then we'll just use some needle nose pliers and take out the scrap. That way I could pull this to the same tension that I have the other ones, which is basically to this spring right here, and attach a new hog ring. Okay, so now we just have to cut the bolts away now that we're happy with it. You definitely want to inspect it to make sure that you're happy with it, and I think that looks great. Nice and tight, no hard spots. This is the top side. The bottom side's not as crucial, but it looks good too. So you never wanted to cut these until you're happy with that. And I like to cut on the inside first and cut across. Then basically expose the bolt through that slit like that, and that should be enough to secure the furniture yet again. We're done with this side. The second side is done exactly in the same manner as this side, except for we're butting the foam up to this one. So we're not going to show that process. We're going to do that next, and then we'll move to the seat. So you can see here that that fabric tucked in nicely doesn't reveal the foam. I can see a little bit of the foam here, but remember we're going to have a second cushion here. And just in case this top bar shows, we've got it covered in fabric, so it'll look like part of the cushion.
Our backrest is now complete, and also our seat bottom. We cover that in a separate video. And here's what it looks like at the end. Coming up next is a materials and tools list. Visit the Sailrite website and you'll find hundreds of decorative fabrics that work great for a jackknife sofa like this or other sofas. Sailrite also carries a large selection of foam. We used a medium density foam, the 1 inch, and a high density foam. Density has to do with longevity. If you use the foam often, a higher density will last longer. IFD has to do with enforced deflection, meaning how soft or how firm is the foam. You'll find all of those selections at the Sailrite website. If you have any questions about the fabric that you'd like to use or the foam, be sure to give us a call or email us. We're glad to help. If you'd like to see the video of how we did the upholstery panels or even the seat, click the video links here. I'm Eric Grant, and from all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.